So as Mark said, I'm Vicky Brennan. I'm the CEO of Proudly Made in Africa, and I'm delighted to be here just past the midway point of the 8th Fashion Revolution Week. So we have a great panel lined up who I'm going to give them the chance to introduce themselves. But for the purposes of you guys pinning the speakers, we have Kate Nolan, who is the founder of Atrium Boutique in Dublin on the top floor of Paris Court Shopping Centre, a sustainable and ethically made fashion boutique. She is also the Chief Strategy Officer for Chupi Jewellery, who I'm sure lots of people will know and adore. And then we have Carrie Ann Moran, who is Ireland's coordinator for Fashion Revolution and currently with Thriftify. And she will tell us more about what Thriftify is, I'm sure. And then we have Christian Smith, who is a board member of Proudly Made in Africa, I'm delighted to say, first and foremost, and the head of partnerships and stakeholder engagement at Fairwear Foundation in Amsterdam. So I think, I hope you'll all agree that we have a very esteemed panel in our company this afternoon. And I think just, I suppose, to give background to what Fashion Revolution is and why we're here, I'm sure Carrie Ann will do this, but it's probably a topic that's close to my heart in particular. In 2013, a building in Bangladesh that housed 8 garment factories collapsed. It was called Rana Plaza. It killed over 1,130 people. The number is disputed. It goes anything between 1132 to 1138, but still too many, of course. And a year later, a couple of activists and friends in the UK decided to wear their clothes inside out and created a hashtag, Who Made My Clothes? And Fashion Revolution was born. And here we are, the 8th go round, where one day of solidarity with workers in South Asia has become a week of events with chapters from Ireland to Nairobi to New York to New Zealand. So really, really nice to be here today. Really, really good to see 35 people on a call, shows solidarity with the movement, with consumers and workers. And without further ado, I think I'm going to throw to Kate. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Great. Thanks, Vicky. I'll kick it all off. How are you doing? And thank you so much for inviting me to participate in the panel. My name is Kate Nolan. And today, as Vicky's introduced me, I'm a co-founder of Atrium Dublin, which is a kind of a luxury boutique up on the top floor of the Paris Court townhouse that exclusively looks at sustainable fashion and lifestyle. I'm also the CSO of Chupi Jewellery, which in itself is a huge monstrous role that I'll go into. But I guess to give an explanation why I'm here in this panel is that I have basically spent the last 20 years working within the fashion industry, and 15 of those working on sustainable fashion, garment workers' rights. I co-founded the first sustainable fashion initiative in Ireland called ReDress. We brought the Clean Clothes campaign to Ireland, which is hosted also with Mark and Comhlámh, and a couple of union groups that were part of that coalition. We actively worked on Rana Plaza and lobbying the companies involved to sign up to the Bangladesh Accord and pay the compensation to Rana Plaza workers. So it's very close to my heart also to keep, marking Fashion Revolution, which has been the kind of globally adopted mark to remember Rana Plaza and what brought us to it. And then, so throughout my career, it's been, from, I guess, the turning point for me was working in India. I had been in a buying offices of high street retailers. I went on to the supply side and very quickly could see that it just wasn't really a sustainable industry, that, the cost of fashion was being borne by the kind of the workers basically that were making it, that the price and the continuous depression of price and the continuous drive for lower and lower cost, not just at retail, came right through the supply chain, and that something had to give. So that turned my heel, and since then I've been working on it.
And I'm going to ask you, Kate, before we move to the other two panelists, this is the kickoff question that's going to spark the debate for the afternoon. What annoys you most about the fashion sector today?
That's such a tough one. There's so many problems within it. I think the huge elephant in the room is the vast size of the industry. You know, what can we do about that? But this idea of that we can have it all, that we can keep producing as much as we want, whenever we want, using whatever resources we want, for as little as we do. It's just, that is probably the biggest concern and the biggest problem, that you just can't actually keep doing and modeling the industry in the way that it has been built purposefully over the last 20 years.
Yeah, yeah.
There are
Thank
others,
you.
but that's
Which
my
I'm
biggest,
sure we'll get to.
you know, we just have to slow down. Yeah, I think that's the biggest message really out of everything.
So I'll move then to Christian. Would you like to introduce yourself to the panel and get something off your chest about the fashion sector today?
It feels a bit like a confessional in a
Yeah.
way. So I'm Christian Smith. I am, as Vicky said, a board member of Proudly Made in Africa, and I'm also working for Fair Wear Foundation in Amsterdam. I've been doing this work now for about 12 or so years, working on the brand side and then the NGO side of things, working also starting off on the environmental side and moving across to the social side. So I've got an experience of both elements of sustainability. It's been really interesting, you know, crossing boundaries, and I think that's something that we really should try to encourage a lot more, because there are very different mindsets of people working in the business side versus those working in NGO, and I wish that wasn't the case, because the moment you can start speaking the same language, the easier it becomes to find solutions. But like Kate, I think the solutions that we've proposed as an industry have been incredibly piecemeal throughout the years, where you see marginal improvements, which really don't reflect the amount of effort and actually money that's gone into the programs for such little impact. So I'm really glad to be part of this, because it helps to kind of share and, well, first of all, acknowledge the damage and the impacts, the negative impacts the industry has done, but also to speak to people, you know, outside of our little sustainable, you know, business bubble, to kind of get great kind of thoughts and opinions and share some stories and ideas about the industry with the outside, but also just to kind of get energy back from people as well, to kind of, you know, reaffirm that yes, it's good that we're doing this, and despite, you know, the willingness or the lack of visibility of change, it's actually is still something that people want to see, regardless of the steps or the little steps or medium steps we've taken to get there. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Christian. And then last but not least, Carrie-Anne Moran, tell us everything about Fashion Revolution Ireland and Thrift to Buy.
Thank you so much, and huge thank you to everybody for bringing this together today. We're super happy from a Fashion Revolution perspective to be here with you all. So I'm Carrie-Anne. I'm here today as country coordinator for Fashion Revolution, and I have been in that position for 3 years. I came into the sustainability world as such when I was a student back, I was a mature student, and I was studying fashion, and I thought I was going to leave one career and jump into fashion, and, you know, it'd be all just fabulous. So second year being a student, I realized that wasn't the case. That was, I think, about 15 years ago, and that's when my passion for what would have been eco design at the moment really came into play. I joined the Rediscovery Centre back in 2008 and became their head of fashion and textiles, and met Kate and ReDress, and from 2008 till around 2011, 2012, the Better Fashion Week, all those amazing initiatives. It was a really good time actually around then. And so I've been in that kind of side of things for many years. The Rediscovery Centre fashion programme was, I suppose, is where my passion really lies, on the environmental side, but also was a social enterprise. So they kind of married the two. And then with Fashion Revolution now, my, I suppose, love and passion for human rights and you know, bringing transparency on that side of the fashion industry, it all kind of marries together now. So yeah, so that brings us up to, I suppose, Fashion Revolution for the last 3 years. You know, we started took the reins from Rosie that Kate used to work with in ReDress 3 years ago. And our first year of that, we had 45, 50 events nationally. Again, just range from workshops to talks to film screenings. Then last year COVID hit and it was just horrible, like those couple of weeks, because it was March and, you know, Fashion Revolution is April. And then this year we're at to coming back and I think we've got 15 events. So I am 4 days into Fashion Revolution. I have not stopped talking all week, which is great. And you'll get to, and people that know me know I love that as well. If I do get a little tongue tied, it's probably because it's just been so much going on in my brain at the moment. But I think what's happening and what we can see with Fashion Revolution in Ireland this year and globally is there's such a drive. I think there's a new energy around it and around the whole sustainability, human rights perspective of the fashion industry, and it really mirrors into the Fashion Revolution I suppose campaign for rights and relationships this year, which I'm looking forward to chatting about further through our conversation.
Amazing. And tell me then, I won't let you off the hook, what is kind of the thing that annoys you most about the sector today?
Yeah, I think I could be here for a while. No, I think to really kind of sum it up and to put one key word is the ignorance, just to touch on, I think what Kate kind of said, and is the ignorance of the size of the industry and how the model that it's run on is broken. And, you know, for brands to be transitioning supposedly to the sustainability side, you know, there's massive levels of production and we just can't, it's Earth Day, you know, and we just, you know, to mark that as well, it's Earth Day, and we need to realize that the fashion industry is now accounting for deforestation, massive habitat loss, you know, and that's just subsequently. So ignorance of the industry really generates. Yeah.
And I suppose then to delve in a little bit deeper, like, so, okay, the size of the industry, I might flick just back to you, Carrie Ann, briefly, because I know you did a whole master's about this, about kind of the environmental impact of fashion. Is there anything kind of that the listeners should know today about kind of use of resources or anything like that?
Sure. Like, I think the one thing to really pinpoint is what we were kind of chatting about over the last couple of days is the whole value chain needs to be taken into account. So from where your material is sourced, how it's made, how it's transported, how it's disposed of, you know, looking at the whole model. And each one of those stages has massive impact by energy use, water, chemical use. And then to mar that, each one of those stages across the value chain, there is human exploitation happening as well. So for example, in the chemical kind of, in the dyeing stage of textiles, you're looking at up to 20% of water pollution coming from that. You have waste that we saw in the textile mountain that we were looking at the other day, the amount of waste that's going in, you know, into our water systems as well. How we wash our clothes, like there is so much to, I suppose, mark that, but each part of that value chain has massive environmental impacts and staggering impacts. But the main, I suppose, overarching thing that we now know from a science perspective is that the fashion industry accounts for up to 10% of all greenhouse gases. And that I think just really shows the scale of this industry, and also shows that how our other industries now conforming to regulation and policy and signing up for COP26 and, you know, all those things that are happening. How is the fashion industry on this scale still not getting aligned with that, you know? So I think that's where our disconnect, and that's where we need to really start kind of joining the dots on.
Yeah. So Christian, I suppose I'll bring you in at this point, having worked on both the environmental and the social side of things, and now probably doing a role that mashes them both together. How does an organization like Fair Wear, or activists or consumers of fashion, how do we kind of make changes that stop baby steps, that turn baby steps into giant leaps? There you go, easy question.
Thanks, Vicky. That's a very good question. I I think there's a couple of things to look at here. I think first of all, there's that personal aspect of diving into a subject and understanding it and making a decision and sticking with it. I think one of the questions that pops up now as well is, you have Earth Day and everyone's like, this is our T-shirt for Earth Day. And you're like, you're making a T-shirt for Earth Day? Really? How? And so when you kind of trawl through all that craziness, all the marketing and all the things, what are the things that matter? And so I think personally, you kind of have to look at yourself and say, okay, well, I can control a certain thing. So I can control how much clothing I buy. So I'm going to think of items as from a cost per wear perspective, or I'm going to only use natural materials, which does not necessarily mean you have zero pollution, but at least, if you use natural materials, you don't have the plastic problem that we've all started to understand really well. So I think that there's that aspect from a personal point of view. And if enough people start doing that, then that also kind of gives an indication to the brands that they need to move. Now, from a more systemic perspective, the work that I've done both on the brand side and where I am now kind of leads to I think three main issues, which I think have an impact on both the social and environmental aspects. And the first of that, and I hope I'm not too controversial when I say this, is just pay people. Pay people properly what they deserve. Pay people a living wage, and let's get rid of all these excuses about oh, it's so difficult to figure out what a living wage is, or I only have 5% or 10 or 50% of a production capacity in a factory. Just pay your share, because in paying your share of a living wage, you're then signaling that it can be done, which makes it harder for other organizations to not do it. But you're also giving people the thing that helps to make legitimate decisions. So if you pay people properly, they're not just living off subsistence income, kind of thinking paycheck to paycheck. They're able to plan. They're able to then pay more attention to their surroundings, to how they source energy, to all these different things. A second component of that is, if you're going to pay people and you're going to worry about how do you get to a living wage, then allow people to unionize. Freedom of association is a human right, and I think there's a lot of brands that may say they agree to FOA in their factories, but when it comes down to actually supporting it, they don't want to, because the immediate thing that comes ahead, if we have unions in factories, then we're just going to have strikes all the time, and then we're going to have disruptions, and then so it's all the negative aspects of unions. But if we think about how we in the West got to where we are, a big role of our working conditions was actually down to unions. So why would you deny the same advancements in those overexploited countries as you you had in time gone by? So those are two things. And then on top of that, when we look at the makeup of the workforce within the apparel and footwear industry, depending on where you're going, you're talking between 60 to 80% of that workforce is actually women. And making sure that you're bringing women into the fold, that they are accounted for, that they are encouraged to participate, that you also take time to understand the cultures in which they are working, to understand what the ramifications of participation might be. That is really important to do. So how do you train women so they have the educational level so they can go from machinist to supervisor to management, if they choose to do so? And then that choice can be made from a great perspective if they're earning proper money. So these things are all linked. And then finally, once you get those moving, then you have people who are much more capable to make decisions in their situations that affect both their social and environmental situation as well.
Yeah.
Such
good points. No, not at all, Christian. Thank you so much. It's what we brought you here for. So, Kate, I suppose then you, as the business owner on the panel, And I think you've kind of mentioned sustainability and ethics as core to what Atrium does. Are there mass strikes in the factories that produce for Atrium?
No. Yeah, I no, and I actually, I think Christian's done a great job to really kind of sum up some really significant problems in the industry. In terms of, supporting a living wage, that's something that I think is just an absolute must within the industry. In 2012, I was involved in a research project that published the Tailored Wages report, which looked at the producing countries across the world and what their legal minimum wage was and what that compared to when you looked at actually how much it costs to live. And no matter where you looked, it was well below the living wage, the legal minimum of the country. So it's not enough to have what they currently have within the industry is, SLA agreements and codes of conduct that talk about legal minimum wages. It's not going to ever be enough to mobilize or to give that financial independence to workers that then give them freedom to demonstrate, to strike, to lobby. And strike is the last result of any worker. Every worker that has to go on strike is losing money. They are taking a huge risk by standing up for their rights, but you also, just to bring it back to Rana Plaza, they walked into that building knowing it was unsafe because they weren't earning enough. In Bangladesh at the time, it was 8% of a living wage was what they were getting. So you were working with people who had no option except to walk into an unsafe building, and the repercussions of that were so profound and really shocked us as a public. It didn't shock anyone who was working in garment industry, welfare garment workers. Hundreds of people had died in the 6 months previous for unsafe working conditions. And that very fact that they didn't have any power themselves to take the risk, no financial security enough behind them to be able to take the risk and say, no, I'm not going to work in that place.
Yeah.
In terms of Atrium and how we approach it, we tend not to work with like really risky countries. So, I try to keep our production, because also we're just a small company. There's me, there's, Siobhan, who is, working with me and beside me all the time on sourcing. And we have then Katie, who's like our store manager. That's just a team of 3. I'm not going to be on a plane going out and doing, factory research and being able to get out to China, which anyway we would have a concern about regardless, because there's no unionization. Bangladesh, which is improving with the Accord, but the type of product that I'm bring into our store is produced in such small quantities, we wouldn't be working with those kind of factories anyway. We tend to make a decision instead not to try and buy volume and sell at low costs, but to buy in quality. It costs a little bit more for sure, and it's not available for everyone. But again, as Christian was saying, the way we look at it is it's a cost per wear. Is this a coat that you will have for life? Then how do you quantify the value of it versus a coat that you bought that you'll throw away in a year or two, or that just won't last for a year or two. So, that's how we approach the kind of process. A lot of the designers that we work with are also producing, so they're so small that they are also producing the work themselves, and we do a bit of vetting around that. And then if there is a brand that we bring in that's expanded its production beyond its own hands and onto a third party, we do look for accreditation of those companies. What kind of relationship have they got with their factories? We're looking for long-term relationships, things that we can see, it's not just fleeting to the next cheapest place to make things, that we want them to have built a relationship and to prove that they are continuing to make efforts to move in the right direction. And I guess Siobhan, my colleague, has a fantastic little phrase, which is progress, not perfection. So when you're demanding everything of everybody and you're like, come on, this isn't good enough. It's not good enough now, but it's good enough for me to know that each year they're making progress.
Yeah.
If I go back each season and they say, we didn't do anything about that, what do you mean? Then I'm likely to eliminate them as a selection from us, because what it looks to me then is this was a token event or a token, operation that they've started maybe using organic materials in one season, but not bringing it through to the next, or reducing it instead of increasing it, suggests to me there's no dedication there to changing their entire process. And so there's just loads of things that, we're constantly making decisions on so many different levels. And the industry works on that kind of huge variance. Small, tiny designers that make their own product versus big multi-stores that buy in volume versus big multinationals that have multiple brands that are buying in huge spaces. So, it's all a little bit different how you approach it, but the same principles apply on what you do to make those selections. We have a policy, things like, we're trying to get plastic free. So, we won't buy in oil derivative materials. We try to keep natural materials, thinking of the end of cycle of the product, to make sure things are degradable after use. Then there's just a lot of work goes into trying to figure out what is and isn't sustainable, what is appropriate and what's not.
Right. So you kind of have your requirements maybe drafted in advance, and then you kind of stick to them when you're going out to source.
Yeah, and everybody's doing different things. I think that's the other thing, is like you might find somebody who's, it's kind of the way I consume as well, a little bit personally. It can be exhausting to try and find this perfect thing, where you're like, it's organic cotton, but it's been made in, a country I don't particularly know enough about, or I'm a bit uncomfortable with, like, what is the working situation in Turkey? And, so then you're thinking about this thing, and then you have to go back and research for days on end about like working systems in Turkey and whether or not somebody has a fair right or ability to execute their rights, in a unionized sense. So like it's a huge and kind of treacherous place to work.
Yeah.
So we have a set of criteria that we like to maintain, and then the next thing is that relationships are built on progress.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I hope nobody can hear that, but my neighbour's car alarm has just gone off. So apologies to anyone that has to hear that. I'll use this moment to do another bit of housekeeping. Layla Karaha has been in the chat putting up the Google Doc. Please put your questions in there to the panel, or pop them into the chat, whatever you feel is easiest for you. I can see a couple of questions are coming in already. There is a question, I think, from Lizzie that says, what can schools do? So that's a question to everyone, but I have hello Lizzie. I have a feeling, Kate, I've been on the receiving end of a school action that you took part in when you were with ReDress. So I might put that back to you first if you're not bored speaking yet.
Apologies, Vicky. Goes to show you school actions work.
They do.
Yeah, schools, what's really important, because you, at such a young age, there's such existential problems that you're bringing to the attention of very young minds. You can't go in full on with like devastating, stories of death and destruction, and and that is where you can go with it, but like it's probably not appropriate for the kids as they're starting out in their journey as consumers. And that ultimately is what you're looking at. You've got like 12 and 13-year-olds, even younger, 10, 11 years, being marketed to all the time. These little, kids magazines have shopping pages in them now with, the kids in schools are online and shopping in awful places, which we can't name, but, that they're, because it's cheap and they can afford it with their pocket money. So awareness is the biggest thing you can give them. Little simple tasks like in a classroom, if you're going to talk about it, to really let them understand the globalization of the industry. A simple thing is to, get them to look at the tag on their clothes and find the country it was made in. And that opens up a huge amount of conversation. What do you know about this country? Maybe as a class, you can pick a country that everybody's clothes was made in and take a little time to research it and see, well, what's going on in that country? And opening conversations that way is really helpful. other, you know, kids love to be active and they're learning. So then you know, little things like, how many t-shirts have you got? You know, a simple little thing can give them a little bit more awareness about, do you need to have 42 t-shirts, you know, in your wardrobe right now? You know, how many have you got versus how many do you wear is another question. Do you think that giving to charity is a good idea? Do you give your clothes to charity? Do you buy from charity? Like, then they're suddenly going, well, no, charity's for giving to. Then, well, where are all these clothes going to go if we're not actually involving ourselves in the commerce of, you know, participating in that kind of circular economy where clothes and goods can be reused and kept out of waste, basically. So, and I think break it down for schools, like, you know, deal with the start first, you know, deal with maybe sourcing the agricultural industry, how the garments, like how fabric is made before you even get into how garments are made. And then looking at garments, and then looking at wear and how you wear and how you consume them, and then looking at waste. And it's a helpful kind of cycle for them to really, over the course of a year, just touch on without being overwhelmed by, and arming them with enough knowledge for them to kind of make their own decisions about whether or not it feels okay to do things the way that they're doing them.
Yeah. Thanks, Kate. Gosh. Carrie-Anne, I'll jump to you. Yeah.
I just wanted to add in there, Fashion Revolution actually has a resource on the website for schools, so for educators, and it's actually a really good resource because it's broken down into age groups, and exactly what Kate was saying is we have to be conscious of our language around all this with certain ears and age groups and stuff like that. We don't want to frighten them away. We want to welcome them in. So Fashion Revolution does have that toolkit and resources there for any school teachers that are here that, you know, want to probably pass this on, and it's a really good guide on how to introduce all that into the classroom. And also for any third level, there's also a student ambassador program as well, that we can help you set up an ambassador program within your college then as well. So there's a lot of resources there as well to navigate that space, because I know it can be just absolute, as Kate was saying there, it's a huge space to try and condense down to funnel into the right kind of language.
Yeah. And Christian, is there anything, do you guys do anything in fair wear that target students?
Students, like university students, we've done some work with them. And I think that these university students that have been particularly focused in the apparel and footwear industry, and I think what's the most shocking thing about that is how little they know about the industry. So I think there's a massive scope to take education on this particular topic all the way down to, you know, like high school, not just as a way to understand the industry, but as Kate said, as a way to understand globalization, and as a way to get people from an earlier age to start thinking much more systemically about our world, that it's not the world isn't a linear world. We are interconnected in many more ways than you can understand. And if you can get to grips with that, then actually you're creating individuals who can deal with the world as is, as opposed to a kind of strange facsimile of what they think the world is.
Yes, yeah. Such a good point. We have a question from somebody studying studying a master's in circular economy principles in the supply chains of luxury fashion. So, Christian, I know you've a lot to say about luxury fashion, and Carrie-Anne, I know you've a lot to say about circular economy. So I think I'll throw to Carrie-Anne first.
Oh, God.
I suppose the question ended, it's from Natalia, and she asked, was it possible to contact the speakers after the session?
Yeah, of course.
There's Natalie, sorry. So yeah, Carrie-Anne, tell us everything you know about circular economy in 2 minutes.
I have to 2 minutes. Okay. Well, first of all, I can feel your pain point with that. Having done my master's in the last couple of years, so I think I'm still getting over it. So I made my master's towards the circular economy, and I suppose aligned it with the fashion and textile industry there. So what was the point of Natalia's question there? Sorry,
So the main part of the question was, could I reach out to speakers afterwards and maybe interview them for research? The research topic is implementing circular economy principles into supply chains of luxury fashion brands.
Sure. So yeah, I think to start off, your main key point is the design stage. The design stage of any product, any good in any industry is where we can eliminate so much. So we can make sure we can align with the right factories, the right people to begin with. We can design out waste, we can source the right products. Design is key, that stage. And that's what I think where a lot of our linear issues come into play, is because design is that initial stage has been completely overlooked. Then we go into more of our production, our sourcing, and to be honest, at that point is where we really need to start thinking of our end of life. This is the fundamental of the circular economy, is that the pieces and anything that we make in the circular economy does not go to waste, does not pollute, and does not come at a cost at any stage. So we need to be at that stage conscious of, can my materials be reused, remade, whatever, upcycled, passed on? Can we bring this back into the loop? And that is the key for the circular economy if you're producing anything, not just in fashion. There's a lot of luxury brands, and I think, one key brand is Stella McCartney, who's really transitioning towards the circular economy. And to touch on, I think, what Kate said earlier on, what I like about Stella McCartney is they really are honest with their approach, in that they're not perfect, and they every year are striving to be better and to be better, but also they bring out, they have science-based targets basically behind what they do. They have the first brand to do an environmental profit and loss. So I think that's a really good source for you to look into there as well, for that. But I could keep going on, but
I suppose just for maybe some of the uninitiated, and I would include myself on this, is there a handy definition for what is the circular economy, just in case anyone on the call doesn't know?
Sure, yeah. God, here we go with definitions. Yeah, I suppose just to summarize what it is, the circular economy is about designing out waste, pollution, and bringing our materials back into circulation.
Yeah, so cradle to cradle kind of, rather than cradle to grave.
Yeah, like
nice.
Yeah, it's circular. Like, to be perfectly honest, the term was coined a long time ago, but actually, if we go back to how industries were made and how we use products many moons ago, we're transitioning back to the old way of doing things. We just have a lot more detail, I suppose, and stuff to be dealing with.
Yeah. And then, Christian, I suppose it's a personal bugbear of mine. I'll just put my hands up. In terms of luxury fashion, then, I mean, when we discuss things on these panels, we talk a lot about fast fashion and the brands whose names we dare not speak. What can the luxury fashion world be doing differently to be better at sustainable and or ethical fashion?
I think what the luxury fashion does really well is making luxury, period. Because it's and it makes it all desirable. And I think that when brands turn around and say, hey, we only make what customers want, I'm like, tell me, who wanted a 30,000 euro Birkin bag? Who? Because even the richest people in the world aren't coming out saying, I want to really splash out cash on a really expensive handbag made of crocodile leather. It's something that I think luxury can do very well. So when we talk about something like circularity, I think one of the first things someone in the luxury sector might say to you is, yeah, but that's not luxury, you're reusing something. And you can flip that out and say, well, actually, there's a story behind the product, and there's ways that you can connect emotionally this product with a customer in a way that you can't connect a virgin product as well. When we look at leather goods, for example, the aging of leather goods and the stories that those goods can tell actually may have a residual value in a way that newer goods don't. Obviously, newer goods are shinier and newer, but once we start to understand the historical, the stories, the kind of narrative behind clothing has value as well, then I think the that's, I think, something the luxury industry can help with. And then the second thing is actual collaboration. I think the luxury industry is very good at saying that they're luxury. They don't have the same issues as fast fashion. I would query that, because I also think that there are some times when, they actually share some of the same factories as fast fashion. And they will say we operate in areas that don't have problems, which is also a misnomer, because everywhere has problems. Yes. If you look at some of the areas that luxury fashions generally produce, someone like Italy is great on environmental stuff. It does really well on that, but it falls way short on the social aspect of sustainability. There's a lot of work to do that, whether it's about wages. They also have to deal with, the African migrants. They have to deal with a lot of subcontracting, and subcontracting is where things can get dark very, very quickly. So I think if luxury companies are able to own up to that, to be a little bit more transparent and a little bit more willing to share resources and knowledge and the capabilities that they have, then I think they can really help to move the industry a lot faster than we have, because what the luxury companies do, everyone else tries to copy, and that goes for the product, but it also goes for the ways that they're run. And I say, look at Zara as an example of that.
Yeah. Super point. Just as we were speaking on that point, we have a question in the chat that is talking about how clothes are made. So the question is, do you see the make part of the supply chain coming back to home countries where products are bought? So I suppose that idea of buy local, shop local, will that solve our problems? Whoever wants to take that question, and I'll probably give you all a go.
I'm happy to start with that, but only because I've just had a really recent conversation with an American organization that's looking exactly at that. And one of the big conversations that took place as COVID really hit, and we saw a massive drop in orders going to factories in the Far East, was maybe this is the time for localization, for radical, rebooting of the industry. So I think there's a couple of things to take note of here. First of all, you cannot simply uproot factories as they are in Bangladesh and China and wherever, relocate them into, even if you're talking Eastern Europe, and expect it to work. It's just not going to happen. You're not going to get 4,000 people in a textile factory working, 12-hour days and whatnot. It's just not going to happen. They already tried that in Ethiopia, and I don't think that worked out too well either. So you have to rethink what the industry would look like for that to happen. And so this company has really been working on mass customization of goods. And what they found is that if you bring items closer to home, you immediately start thinking, well, costs are going to increase. And yes, certain costs do increase, but if you also take into consideration the fact that a lot of these brands, when they produce, they overproduce, which means that they have to make up their margins. And so that overproduction also means that they're kind of playing a futures game to some extent, because they know they're going to have to discount the cost of goods. But what they find is that if you're able to bring industry close to home, you're also able to have a higher margin, because you're only selling the things you produce. And in fact, you're only making things once they've been ordered, because you can then have maybe a 48-hour point from the order being made to the order being shipped. It's only 48 hours. And so therefore you also keep that quick delivery. So I think there's an opportunity to bring things closer to home. And when we look at circularity, for example, and that model kind of fits in, because you're able to then have a quicker turnaround time, but you're also able to do things that are kind of interesting from a production perspective as well, by having these facilities close to home and readily accessible.
Carrie-Anne, Kate, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think people are working on similar things. I think, as Christian said, you know, people do. It actually, there is quite a lot of cost to exporting very far away. You know, shipping costs and you know, the unpredictability of what, you know, is going to turn around. And then there are brand costs, you know, when things go wrong, and you know, people are less and less you know, happy to purchase into those kind of things. So we're already seeing a slight migration closer to, you know, I don't know what home countries, as in, like, I can't really, right now it's not set up in a way that people who purchase in Kenya will have their clothes made in Kenya. I can't, you know, that hasn't, unless you're buying in small quantities, that hasn't yet happened. But I do think there is a kind of a reconsideration of things and what could be done if you actually changed up the model a little bit. And you do have to think outside of what you currently have in order to look at that. So, you know, you probably can't have, you know, 24-hour shipping and localized customizable production like Christian's describing, but people are definitely looking at it if the market is prepared to wait a little bit longer for their piece. So there's this kind of Amazonification where everything has to ship now, and you know, it's all up in a warehouse and it should be produced and ready to go. But actually, if we, again, it's down to this, you know, slow it down. You don't need so much and you don't need it so quick. It allows a little space to breathe, where actually, yeah, you could have, you know, brands that, you know, even household brand names that have kind of operational or production hubs close and localized to within their market, producing for their market. But, you know, there's a cost and scale. So, you know, it doesn't cost the same to produce 10 garments as it does to produce 10,000 per unit. And that's what a lot of these businesses are built on, is this, you know, cost of scale, that the faster we can grow to hit these really big volumes, then the lower the cost of the garment per piece. Everybody's able to take a lower cut on the margin. Everybody is prepared to get paid a little bit less because we'll sell so much more. So we have to get over that before we can really transform the industry.
Yeah. Carrie-Anne, anything to add? We're going to be moving into break room soon.
Yeah, no, I think just from an Irish perspective, just kind of like, I don't think I have much to add on what both Kate and Christian kind of said, but I do think, like, Ireland used to be such a hub of manufacturing and craft. And it is really heartbreaking to see, like, that started to transition now from the late 80s to the 90s. You know, my old work studio was an old textile factory, loads of part of Dublin City, or all these textile hubs and stuff like that. And I think to bring that back, you know, the whole, if you were to reshore and bring manufacturing back, do we have, this is one question I remember from a conversation ages ago, it's like from an Irish perspective, do we have the skills in our current, you know, society to bring that level of manufacturing back? We don't train people as such anymore.
Yeah.
You know, in those areas. Yeah, you probably go and do fashion design and stuff like that. But we used to do apprenticeships, tailoring, dressmaking, you know, and really valued those skills as well. And I think that's what we need to be very conscious of, you know. I know it's a slightly little different angle on this, but if we were to reshore, are we ready for that reshore? No, we're not, because we've actually eliminated those skills. And that's a really scary thing, is that we have transitioned so much in the last 20 years, we're not actually keeping some of our skills up with them.
Yeah. And would it resolve labour issues? There is a couple of points coming through around legislation and the space for legislation. Would legislating for making human rights violations illegal, would that change the fashion sector? There's been various pushes at EU level, Irish level, for legislation on due diligence in the supply chain, is the official term for it. But does the panel have any thoughts on legislative processes, or even, I suppose, environmental legislation? Carrie-Anne, you touched on that in your intro. Open floor, who wants to take that?
Big question, Vicky.
Yeah. It's what we're here for.
Yes, it's the short answer from me anyway. There's definitely a role for legislation, but legislation is, you know, in the world and the format of how we trade at the moment, due diligence is there. It's, you know, it's written in, the Ruggie framework is signed up to by, I mean, just there's so much there on paper. Everybody's willing to say, yeah, of course. But then what you have is, you know, trade agreements that are constructed within different regions that just pay no heed at all to them. So, you know, like that's why, you know, the garment has a country of origin on it, is because there's a trade agreement within that country that lets it have a special duties arrangement. And that's totally separate to then the same discussion that happens in like human rights and legislation. You know, they just, until they're all married together, it's going to become extremely difficult to see legislation having an effect. And then, you know, the effect there is, you know, governments and government bodies that are prepared to make trade agreements with each other based on principles like environmental impact, human rights impact, as well as the, you know, economic impact. That's what sustainability is. It's the three pillars. Until they're prepared to do that, you know, singular companies are, you know, really just down to what does the owner feel like, you know, or what's the, you know, what's the direction of the board, and if they're not tied by any legislation, I mean, their obligation is just to make the greatest share price.
Carrie Ann, Christian, do you have anything to add on that?
Yes, I would say that legislation can work, but it has to be properly thought through and implemented. We have seen a couple of attempts at legislation at different EU country levels. So you have the French duty of care, duty of vigilance. You have the UK Modern Slavery Act. We all know how successful that's been. We have a Child Act in the Netherlands, and recently there's been talk of a due diligence legislation in Germany. And all these legislative proposals or laws as they stand right now have problems. And as we move to legislation at the European level, it's really important that the legislation kind of raises the floor, so that the minimum standards applies to everyone, but also it's not a minimum that kind of is out on the floor level. It kind of raises that and helps us to at least, without too much more effort, in inverted commas, increases the things that we have to do in order to push things forward. I think the inclusion of SMEs is really important to that as well, because when we look at SMEs throughout Europe, I think they present like 90% of the economy of European economies through SMEs. So while there's a lot of, you know, we should get the big companies to move, well, actually SMEs have a fundamental role to play, and they're also working generally in the factories that aren't covered by the bigger companies. So even if the bigger companies are doing stuff, there isn't that kind of rollover to the smaller companies that you'd like to see, because they operate in very different areas. So that is a really important piece to ensure that you have to, even if someone's got 50 employees, they have to be included in the legislation. And then you think of things like proportionality. Well, if you've only got 50 employees, then how do you make the legislation proportionally appropriate to an organization like that? Speaking of the trade deals aspect, I think the EU has been trying to implement certain, I wouldn't say restrictions, has put in certain carrots in place in order to sweeten deals or make deals with it. So the most recent one was the Vietnamese trade deal that had written into it human rights requirements, which came about as there was a new ILO convention on violence and harassment in the workplace. So that is something that the EU saw, made kind of Vietnam sign up to it, and then the Vietnamese are busy kind of ratifying that in country as well. So these things can't work alone. They have to come with a suite of measure, and we call that a smart mix. and where you're encouraging, policy, you're encouraging law, legislation, but you're also encouraging behaviors in other ways, including financial and trade, in order to push the way forward.
Amazing. Yes, thank you, Christian. Really important stuff to touch on. I suppose we'll close out the panel now, because it's of me not to say thank you all for your company this afternoon. Thanks for joining the event. Thank you to our wonderful speakers, Christian Smith from Fairwear, Carrie-Anne Moran from Fashion Revolution Ireland, and Kate Nolan from Atrium and Chupi Jewellery. I like what Victa has just put into the chat. I said, can I say no if it exceeded my expectations? Only if that's the reason, Vic. So yeah, thank you all for joining us today. It's been a pleasure. Some really, really insightful questions, gives me hope for the future of fashion in Ireland. And again, thank you to our wonderful panelists who will be available. If anyone wants to contact the Comhlámh Trade Justice Group, I think the email address has been popped into the chat. Do consider joining Comhlámh. The Trade Justice Group are at this kind of thing 24/7, 365. If you want to be part of the movement, come join us. You can email us on that email after the session. And I don't think there's anything left for me to say. So it's sunny outside. I would suggest that we all go out and enjoy that. Let's keep the fashion revolution going. Thank you very much, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Vicky.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Thanks,
Thank
Carrie-Anne.
you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.